All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and start off with a roll call, please, Nicole.
Sure, Kira. Hello, good afternoon. Ellen.
Hi, here. Good afternoon.
Dinah. Misha.
Present.
Michael.
Present.
And then Stephanie.
I am here. All right, thanks everyone. Before we move into public comment, are there any announcements from anyone from the committee? All right, if there are none, we will move into public comments. Are there any public comments that are not on our agenda today that anybody would like to bring up? All right. I think we're gonna just breeze right on through this meeting today, which I have no problems with. All right, so next is our approval of the record of action from our October 21st meeting. Hopefully you all have had a chance to take a look at that. Does the committee have any edits or changes that need to be made? Okay, I'll open it up for any public comment on the approval of record of action. All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion, please.
I move to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Thank you, Michael.
A
I
second.
think, oh, thank you, Ellen. I didn't hear it, but I saw the mouth moving. All right, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Kira. Ellen.
Aye.
Dinah.
Aye.
Oh, thank you. Tamisha.
Aye.
Michael.
Aye.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Stephanie.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. All right, so we are going to, and my agenda just disappeared. We are going to move into our next agenda item, and we'll be discussing the gap in diversion options for transitional age youth. As you all know, our past few meetings have been around discussing the different diversion programs available for young people, generally ages 13 to 17, and also diversion options that are available for adults, but not a focus on transition age youth. And so seeing that gap, thank you, Michael and Tamisha and Chris. We had a chance to have a little bit of a planning meeting and just kind of go through and brainstorm over what we had seen so far, and thought it would be really good for us to start going into learning a little bit more about what transition age youth programs are out there. Also hearing some of the public comments from some of our previous meetings about there really being a need for transition age youth services. And so we have two programs that we talked about during our planning meeting that we had. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris, who will be presenting on those programs, I think.
I'm gonna try.
Okay.
You will hear some drilling and things like that probably in the background. They didn't schedule it with me, I'm sorry. So I think actually the first thing that we have on the agenda is not a program as much as it is a report coming out of the city of San Francisco that Stephanie brought to our attention during that planning meeting. And so this is policy priorities for transitional age youth. And I think this is just a really great foundation in terms of understanding what we mean when we say transition age youth. If you page down a page or two, Nicole, or 3 or 4. Yeah, I think it should be the next page after it. Well, okay. Let me just look and tell you what page I want, or I could have squared. There we are. Okay, so transition age youth, for definition for folks who hear that and don't know what we mean, youth who are disconnected are 16 to 24-year-olds who need additional supports and opportunities to make a successful transition to adulthood, right? And then it lists off a number of characteristics or defining sort of criteria for what or who would comprise transition age youth. So obviously what we are wanting to do here is to potentially identify transitional age youth as a priority area in terms of diversion services and programs, having identified them as a gap in terms of the services and programs that are offered now. This report, however, is way deeper than just any one system, right? This is a citywide sort of look at this from a bunch of different angles, right? From education and making sure that folks who are struggling in school are identified early and given or offered resources to help them to stay in school and to complete school successfully, to healthcare. Housing is huge and is all throughout this report, as well as workforce development, or specifically with them job skills training, right? And being able to develop the types of skills that would get them employed, because we know employability and the ability to keep housing and these other various issues would lend themselves to transitional age youth potentially entering the system or penetrating deeper into the system as they should. This laundry list that we have right here also sort of talks a little bit about, and they go into more detail in the additional pages of this, how much overlap there can be with foster youth, right? Aging out and not really having a place to go. Those are a lot of the young people or transition age youth who may not even be minors per se, right? Who can end up in the system if there are not the additional supports and resources made available to them. Also, you're seeing a lot of trends and systems involvement. I won't spend too much time going directly into that, because this is for the city of San Francisco. Those numbers would look a lot different in Contra Costa County, I'm sure. Probably some of the trends may look the same, but the numbers and the dynamics would be specific to Contra Costa County and its demographics. That being said, if this group were to move forward, sort of highlighting transitional age youth as an area of focus, or a population that we want to focus some efforts around in terms of at least making the recommendation, let's say, that there be more of a focus or an emphasis within diversion programs to respond directly to the needs of and prioritize transition age youth. There's some language toward the end of this, particularly in the appendices of this report, that I think we might want to look at a little bit more closely. So I would point us to, let's see. I would point us to page 35 of the agenda. And as you can see, this won't be unfamiliar to anybody on this particular call, right? There was a task force similar to sort of the way that things were done in our instant case, right? In terms of how to address the problem of dealing with and improving the life chances of young adults or transition age youth, right? That includes making disconnected transitional age youth a priority, enhancing service coordination, improving quality of service delivery, and increasing systems capacity. This goes into a lot more detail about how, the city of San Francisco should choose to do that. And then if we scroll down to page 39, I think there's some direct language that we can use for a recommendation. And so what I would at least throw out for consideration, not necessarily a vote today. I mean, we can wait until there's some language and you guys can see it. But what we've done in the past with a recommendation where there was a document like this is we have made a recommendation with some, basic language to say what the recommendation is meant to do. So say in this case, identifying transitional age youth as, a priority population for diversion, and then sort of cite this particular appendix and then potentially attach it along with the list of recommendations that go forward, so that there's no need to sort of reinvent this. And the reason I even bring that up is because there's just a lot of great information here, even though this is from 2014, right? High quality programs are transformative, staff qualifications, staff who are culturally responsive, especially for young people of color, youth with disabilities, LGBTQ youth, and sort of describing what that is, the program philosophy and design grounded in a youth-centered, strength-based, positive youth development philosophy, and then breaking out what that is, as well as program components, that are really based around making sure that there's that support, that coordination of support that youth or transition age youth know, first of all, get access to the resources that they need, but also learn how to access those resources on their own. And so, I mean, that seems a pretty good jumping off point for something like this, where we're not reinventing the wheel, but at the same time are able to move this forward, potentially to take it to the body at large at some point when the recommendations are ready to take that step, and then potentially up for county leadership consideration, whether that's PPC or Board of Supervisors. So just looking at this language, it seems like, it really lends itself to sort of, getting to those underlying needs and standards of care that we should have for this population. So I just wanted to bring that to folks' attention and pause for a second to see if people have any thoughts, any questions about this that I could answer, or at least questions about sort of how I'm thinking about it. I mean, I did not write this, so I would do my best in terms of trying to speak to what's in the report, or at least why it seems to lend itself to this particular population for Contra Costa County.
Chris, I just want to make sure everybody here in this committee knows that we do have specific caseloads. We have 3 probation officers in East, 2 in Central, 2 in West that are solely designated to this age group and population. One of which is gender responsive specific in East County.
Thank you. That's good to know. I think especially for this committee, what folks are wanting to see is, in the event that a person who falls into this age group, or even these circumstances in addition to the age group, should they happen to find themselves in a situation where they are faced with the potential of systems involvement, that there are programs, say diversion or other alternative programs specifically built for them and those specific set of needs and challenges that they face, to help them navigate and address those while holding them accountable for behavior in a way that does not include or does not necessitate incarceration. So I think it would be helpful to be able to coordinate, with those folks. Is definitely promising that there are already some people in place who are dedicated directly to that and wanting to make sure there's an off-ramp specifically for this population. Helen, you're off mute. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciated this report. I thought it was really thoughtful and well put together. I know that various efforts that many of us in this group have been collaboratively involved in around smart reentry that probation had, that really focused on TAY and other efforts to enact types of diversion or sort of off ramps, as you said, Christopher, have featured TAY and have shown that those that we serve that are in the TAY population have some really pressing needs. So I really support the idea of focusing on or lifting up more opportunities to divert our TAY population. I think it gives us kind of that early intervention in a way, because they're that's the first step of our adult system. And if we can really work with folks in that group, I think it bears fruit as they grow up and get older, and hopefully we're able to stabilize them in a way that's really productive and leads to, a reduction in them being impacted by the system and a reduction in recidivism. So I do think that some of the needs that you mentioned and that are highlighted in the San Francisco report just require a lot of resources and service connection. So I think from what we see at the Public Defender's Office, obviously housing is a strong need for many of our clients, but especially in the TAY age group. So that might be something for us to focus on as well, housing, and then of course education and some employment readiness. But no, I really appreciated seeing the report, and I think a lot of it holds true for us here in Contra Costa for those we serve.
Thank you. Floor is open for any other questions or comments from the committee before we transition to public comment.
Chris, I can't remember, did they have any type of budget information anywhere? Were you able to find anything?
Oh boy, okay. Now I probably would be better off trying to skim, because it was before I, was out of the office for a few days when I sort of ran through this. So I don't recall off the top of my head. Let's see.
Okay, no worries.
So in my transparent skimming right now, I'm not seeing that there is necessarily specific budgetary information, at least in my scrolling. Doesn't mean it's not here, just means that I'm not currently familiar with it. But what I do see is that they identified some costs to the city of in lost wages and other expenses, right? If this particular population isn't properly addressed, right? So there was some level of estimate done in terms of the cost to the city because of these service gaps and what it would mean in terms of losses that the city would incur. So I'm sure there's more to that, and probably more that followed from this. This is a bunch of recommendations here that the city then had to move on. So I'm certain that even if it's not directly listed here, because this might have been on the front end of the action, that some budgetary considerations were made, and with a little bit more digging, we might be able to find out what they look like.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else before we open it for public comment? Scrolling. All right. Any public comment as far as this particular report and transition age youth as a priority area? All right, I don't see any right now. So again, this was just meant for consideration at this point, sort of bringing it to folks' attention. Wasn't asking for a vote necessarily on this today. What I can do is sort of draft some language along the lines of what I laid out earlier. And so the next time that we meet, you know, that's something that we can potentially talk about adding to the working list of recommendations that you all have now.
And also what I would just add, it would be really, I think this is like a chance for us to kind of marinate on this. I know it's a lot of information, and then we're getting ready to hear about another program. But the goal for our next meeting is to be able to do a little bit of workshopping and really just start maybe digging a little bit deeper of what we could potentially see happening in Contra Costa County. And so, you know, even if we don't have anything now, just thinking about for our next meeting, that's kind of the hope that we have, is that we'll be able to workshop things out and ideas out a little bit more. Okay, I'm done, Chris.
All good. I was hoping you could keep talking so that maybe folks wouldn't have to hear all of this buzzing in the background. So with that, I suppose we could move on to the next attachment, which is a diversion model that we wanted to also just briefly highlight. That's the Mentor Diversion Program. It is in Alameda County, and I can walk you guys through sort of the high points of this particular presentation, and then, which may be a bit of a theme today, unfortunately, if I may, I'm going to put one Mr. Michael Pearson on the spot to talk to us about this because of his professional experience with this program, and a client of his is actually Michael that brought this to my or to our attention in that working meeting that Stephanie mentioned before. So before he, you know, while he takes his time, probably swallowing some water and hopefully not spitting it out at the mention of his name just then, I'm just going to read through this, and then if he is, you know, willing and able, he can, you know, give us a little sense of his experience with his client in terms of this program. So this was created in '91 by the DA's office in Alameda County. As you see there, non-statutory narcotic diversion program for nonviolent first-time offenders or nonviolent first-time incidents in terms of drug usage and charges for folks who are 18 to 29. So not exactly you know, the same age range that we just spoke about before in the report in terms of transition age youth, but definitely plenty of overlap there. The program's goal is similar to sort of the spirit of what you heard before, right? Assisting people in developing employable skills through counseling, education, job training. And we page down to the next slide. So this is, at least in this instance, a 2-year program, you know, specifically for folks in Alameda County with no violent offenses in their past, who have frequent check-ins with the court and go on to potentially pursue various modes of education or job training, as well as looking for work. And I think one of the really important components of this is in the next slide, which is all of the organizations, right, that are all in collaboration to make this work. So there are a number of different, community-based organizations, as well as other school districts, other services and programs that all take part in this on some level to make it work and to sort of provide support and resources to the folks who go through these programs. I think there's also some information on the next slide about the program successes. Right, so they've got some pretty staggering successes there on the numbers. Now, I'm not exactly sure how old this presentation is. So the numbers may look a little bit different in terms of being up to date now, but that's some pretty significant early success in terms of outcomes. And Michael, if you are on and you don't mind talking to us a little bit about, obviously without giving details that we don't need, your impression of the program, I think that would be helpful.
I'm sorry, I have these construction people running in and out of my house, and I will come right back to, if you can come right back to me. I'm sorry.
All right. We are all having construction done today. All the construction workers in the general area conspired against us as a group, and that's fine. I suppose what I would say to folks about this is, so what we're wanting to do is get folks a sense. So we've talked about what we do have in the county, wanting to get some examples of some models that exist outside of Contra Costa County specifically. And I see that you're back, Michael, so you can go for it now.
Okay, so Alameda County has a really good diversion program for transitional age youth. And I looked at it the other day. I think they raised the age before. I think it only went to 24 or 26, but it's a really comprehensive program. They are really, they're really challenged and engaged with the youth, and it's very good success rate with the program. They've had great results. I've had clients that I was successfully able to get into the program. And one of the benefits for them is that it's a pre-plea thing. So any kind of record that they had doesn't show up. So they don't even have to enter a plea in something. So it won't show up on their records. They have to do a very rigorous, they do assignments, they have to turn work in, and they work with a team of professionals to kind of guide them through the program. So I've had really good success with a couple clients who were able to successfully complete the program. And I'm proud to say both of the people that I have that completed the program are gainfully employed. They are doing well, and they have not had subsequent arrests. So I'm a proponent of this program.
And Michael, was there a cost to them to enter the program?
I don't recall a cost being levied against them. I don't think there was a cost.
Thank you. So as I was saying, right, the point is to show you all some models of some things that exist outside the county, not because it is this committee's charge to design programs, right? This committee's charge is more about developing recommendations for use countywide in terms of diversion programs and alternatives. And so in so doing, right, it's helpful to get a sense of what's out there that seems to be working, because that may inform the recommendations that you develop. Meanwhile, I think, to the extent that as we come across some of these models, folks become interested in wanting to see some things implemented directly, that could potentially be
connections with some individuals that do mentoring work and
that could potentially, she must have saw like what's going on in my head coming. That could potentially be a space for coordination with other collaboratives that are engaged in similar work, right? We already have some coordination with JJCC, and also there's Reimagining Youth Justice. And so they, especially Reimagining Youth Justice, as far as I can tell, seems to be a little bit more directly interested in how do we shape something new in lieu of, right? And so to the extent that models like this ring out to you guys, I think highlighting those and sort of bringing them or potentially sending someone, you know, a representative to sort of share those things with that collaborative to say, you might want to consider this as you're reimagining what the youth, you know, justice could look like in the county would be appropriate, you know, so that we're not duplicating work, so that we're not sort of getting away from making the recommendations and then going on to the next work plan items that we have, because we all know that we have our hands full. That being said, I don't know if DA Becton might want to speak to that. Also, I don't want to speak out of turn if when we say Reimagine Youth Justice, we're thinking specifically about folks under the age of 18, and transition age youth-based programs might not be the proper form. So DA Becton, I know you maybe accidentally clicked off mute before, but if you want to intentionally click off mute now and maybe speak to any of this, I would welcome that feedback. And it also sounded like you might have quite a bit going on, so we can understand that and move forward to see if there are any additional questions.
I'm sorry, I was, I couldn't, I'm actually in 2 meetings, so I'm sorry. I couldn't get on, open up and get out of the other room fast enough to answer you, sorry. What was your specific question for me, Chris? I'm sorry. I think you wanted me to, I wasn't sure what you wanted me to speak to.
Right, so I think there's 2 things generally. One, shameless plug for Reimagining Youth Justice. If anybody doesn't have enough meetings to go to and would like to, you know, get involved. And in addition to that, because we are specifically talking about transition age youth right now, and we recognize that our charge is not program design, but more countywide recommendations to make sure there's inclusion in diversion. Wanting to get a sense of if transition age youth would be included in Reimagine Youth Justice, or if the collaborative space is intended only for people under the age of 18.
Okay, thank you for that question. So, I mean, technically we were specifically focused on youth that are under the age of 18, but certainly this, as I've had a chance really to look at some of the statistics around our youth that are 18 to 24 and really see that this is one of the places where we have some of the most significant racial disparities, also very high rates of recidivism. It is an area that I think we should be expanding our conversation to. I did unsuccessfully put in a proposal for Measure X funds as a pre-filing diversion program. It's what I'm hoping for to get really the funding that would be needed for the service provider that we would need to partner with as a nonprofit. BSCC does have a grant, I understand, that should be opening up sometime the early part of 2022. And so they have promised to give me an alert as well when those applications become available.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions from the subcommittee about anything that we've discussed, whether it's this particular model, Reimagining Youth Justice, as you heard it, or Michael's direct experience with it if he's not tied up with construction? Not seeing any public comment on any of the above?
Well, I just want to comment just a little bit about just a general comment about that this age group. This is a vulnerable age group. I mean, it is so critical right now. And I had got into this repeated pattern of representing these kids from 18 to 22, 23, 24. Two of them were facing, 30 plus years in jail, and it's a similar story with a lot of these people having, very little opportunities or just not having other avenues. And a lot of them were kind of repeat offenders since juvenile days. You see a pattern of the juvenile days. And I don't think that's, juvenile incarceration. I don't think that's the best way to deal with preventing or producing productive members of society. I have a lot of strong opinions about that, and I'm not to talk about the system, but it's I've had a lot of juvenile clients, and it's more, our system is really concentrating on just the punishment portion of this, and it's really not addressing the real issue with this. The real issue is just the punishment instead of, these decisions that these kids make at this age will affect the rest of their lives. I keep telling my 17-year-old son this. These decisions are going to carry, you're going to carry this for life. I made a similar bad choice when I was 19 years old, and that's still coming up every time my name is put into something. I still have to disclose something that happened, over 30 years ago. So it's really sad that these people are having these this age group or this group of the population is having these kind of long-term effects on them with just kind of the punishment portion of it instead of more diversion, more other programs for them to get on track. So I'm really in support of us actually coming up with some kind of proposal, some kind of plan, proposal. I guess we have some parameters of what it could look like, but I would like for us to even think out the box to come up with some ideas on this. So I really would like to hope we can have a good brainstorming session for this. So.
Thank you, Michael. And I'll just point out to you that a brainstorming session, I think, is forthcoming. That's something that that our Madam Chair also indicated that she would be interested in. And we might have had it this time. The reason that we didn't is, number one, because we talked a little bit about COCO Lead Plus and the eligibility criteria for that. So as not to reinvent the wheel as we're trying to develop eligibility criteria to be used countywide. And so wanting to close the loop, not even close the loop, but at least continue the conversation directly from that. And I think those brainstorming sessions can be a good way to end the year, so that we end the year on a high note with folks sort of being able to really think about what this should be and why we're here and what this work is, and sort of carry that energy into the new year. So with one more meeting left on the calendar, it seemed like it could be a good way to end things off, is to do a lot of that brainstorming. So if you're interested in that, like Michael has just mentioned, please come back for our next meeting next month, which of course means in a couple of weeks, scheduled for December 16th. And if there are no other questions or comments, I think I did open it up for Cheryl. I see your hand.
I don't know, I'm feeling, when we we have someone who gets to 23 years old, and as Michael just described, they've been in the system since they were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And we already know that we have the judges who have already predisposed to not put them in diversion programs. So I'm feeling a little ambivalent because my thought is this brainstorming session is what we're going to be talking about is what we're going to do for diversion for children who we know that the judges are not prone to put them, or young people, we're not prone to put them in the programs that they're not eligible for because the system is doing exactly what the system is meant to do, right? This system is not meant to assist these children because we've already put them so deep into the system by that time. If they are already 8 years into the system, by the time they're 22, it's too late. What I would like to see this brainstorming session focus on is what kind of preventative measures are we doing to keep them out of this system in the first place? I think this is why I'm sitting here with this face like this. It's like, I get it. Yes, we should be doing some diversion, but I'm trying to divert them from getting to this point in the first place. So no, I don't want to talk about when they get to 25 and they've already been in the system for 10 years. I want them in here in the first place at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. So that's what I want to see on this agenda. What do we do to divert these children from these baby jails? I know we got some fancy words, juvenile hall and all these other fancy words for community service, all that other fancy words. And I can say it in 8 languages and he still comes out to jail, baby jail. We need them out of this criminal legal system, and we need to find a way to, and it's not just the 4 walls that I'm talking about, because when you put a child on, in the system, probation, community service, it changes their mentality. It changes their sense of worth. It changes the sense of who they think they are, and it changes their sense of who they think society thinks they are, and who they think that society thinks how much they are worth. That's what I would like to get us to discuss in helping these children think they are worth more than the $500,000 we are spending per child to keep them incarcerated or part of this criminal legal system. And we're spending what? A few thousand to educate them? A few thousand, tens of thousands to maybe make them something of value in society's words. Maybe that's the conversation we should have. Because this conversation about trying to rescue somebody after this system doesn't want them there. The system wants that 500,000 per head. So that's what I would like to talk about, keeping them out of this system in the first place, so that they're not commodified to keep feeding them into the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So that brought up for me a couple of things just to point out. I think you raised some, of course, as always, really great points that need to be considered. And I think there are 2 ways to go about looking at and potentially addressing those things from our end. One, I think, is better coordination with PICE. I don't know if Stephanie, you could speak more to the fact that there is a collaborative setting that is meant to deal specifically with prevention and intervention hence the sort of focus of this group on the diversion. We want to make sure that we don't, we want to make sure that while we support the important work of doing prevention and intervention work, we don't lose or allow youth who may have already entered the system to further slip through the cracks, because we focus all of our attention and efforts on the front end. And so I think we can definitely do a little bit of a more dynamic job of showing up in those spaces and having them show up in ours, to make sure that the concerns that we have from our vantage point are being heard by them and vice versa, to make sure that there's coordination of efforts and collaboration between those two entities to make sure that prevention and intervention in the county are as expansive as possible and reach as many youth as possible, so that less youth are coming into the system in the ways that you describe and in the ways that we know are real. And the second thing that I would say is, I think this speaks to another potential diversion recommendation that's come up, and that is ensuring that there are options for diversion at every decision point, right? Not just when there's a charge potentially to be filed, or a plea to be entered, or post plea, but also at the point of arrest, right? Or also at the at these various other decision points further up the chain, that could also play a huge role, again, in providing those off ramps before folks are floating downstream into the justice system. So those are two things that I would point out, in response. And I think we can work with folks over in PICE, which is a subcommittee of JJCC, to make sure that we're having that collaboration. Any other questions or comments on this?
Yeah, just to reiterate, and Cheryl, I totally understand the frustration. I think what we're trying to do is not look at this, as Chris was just saying, not as an either or, but a both and how can we really look at this in a holistic way, because our young people are getting hit in every single direction. And I think sometimes our focus has been either or, and so just focusing on one direction. So we're trying to figure out how can we actually, and this has come up, like Chris said, at several meetings too, like how can we try to support young folks at every single level of this system, from the intervention and prevention through, and transform the system and how it currently works. And so I think that's what our thought was for this. And also going back to like the San Francisco report, it is really a holistic approach to supporting transition age youth. And so looking at needs and supports at every different level. And I think one of my goals, what I would like to see us do, is come up with those different recommendations for what the county needs to do. And I think part of those recommendations would be to say, okay, there needs to be prevention and intervention supports, and this is what it could potentially look like. And PICE is working on that as well. And figure out how we're coordinating better as these multiple committees in the county to ensure that we're being more efficient in how we're supporting young folks.
And I think to Cheryl's point and Michael's point and Stephanie's point about being able to do both, that really having a front end diversion where we're pre-plea or even ideally pre-filing as early in the chain and the process of the criminal legal system as we can push that diversion point, you're going to lower the impact on someone's eventual criminal record and reduce that possibility. And so even if we could look at a model that would be pre-filing, something akin to what is happening in the juvenile program right now, I think you kind of roll back some of those barriers when someone is further along in the criminal legal process, and then they have to then report that they were charged and then it was dismissed. So I think looking at it, looking at other programs that either we have locally or they have in other jurisdictions, that would definitely be a best practice to kind of help reduce the future impact of these cases on the individuals that we serve.
Thanks.
Exactly. We had a long discussion on this last week. We did a whole panel thing with ACLU and BOAPA and Legal Women Voters about the impact of misdemeanors on people's records and what it does to you throughout your life. And those misdemeanors can wreak havoc on you so that later on, yes, you may have a low-level felony or whatever, but that record follows you. And then, yes, so then they do have this coming along, and then all of a sudden you're known as this serial menace. And so that's what I'm talking about. If you're not charging these wobbler offenses, that could be when they're younger, and it's not charging these misdemeanors, and they don't have these on their record, we could be talking about something totally different. When Michael made this description of these 22 or 23-year-olds, of something that they did when they were 15, 16 years old, right? This is what I'm talking about. So there does need to be a discussion about these infractions and misdemeanors that happen at these young people's age. And what is it that we're looking at that can keep them out of the system early on, that comes back to haunt them as they get older. So I just think there has to be something that's different than someone else's discretion, and it's just not working. It's not working. These are things that we need to be looking at more closely.
And Kira, I see you put a question in the chat for Ellen. Oh, thank you, Ellen. And I see you just answered. Did you want to just come off mute and explain a little bit?
Sure. And if this is, in fact, Kira's question, we run an early representation program that's AB 109 funded. That is a collaboration between the Public Defender's Office, local law enforcement agencies, and various other community-based partners. The goal of the program is to provide representation from the time of law enforcement contact for individuals who are cited or arrested for misdemeanors in Contra Costa. And so, we were finding that a lot of folks were missing that initial court date. We're picking up subsequent cases or having additional law enforcement contact between the time they were cited or arrested on a misdemeanor and between the time their case was filed and they made it to court, which sometimes can be six to 9 months. And so our goal is, of course, to get folks to court. We have texting technology and we connect with them around their court date to provide really critical early legal services, such as, connecting them with domestic violence cases classes in a DV case, or, explaining to them the obligations of a restraining order, or maybe in a domestic violence case, working with them around, what it means to have your license suspended and trying to connect them with a class early on. We negotiate and work with the DA's office very closely to see in some of these cases if we're able to do diversion on the front end, or if we're able to arrive at some kind of understanding around filing, present mitigating evidence about our clients. And it's been very successful in increasing the court appearance rates and avoiding people getting arrested on warrants for missing court dates, which was happening. Over half of misdemeanor clients were missing their first court date in the sort of research study we did out of just East County. And we were able to reduce that to under 20% of folks that are now missing that first court date. So we've really worked to get those numbers down. And then another program that's very connected with early representation is a Board of State and Community Corrections grant called HIP, or the Holistic Intervention Partnership, that we launched in 2020, which works with this same population and provides resources and support. So we have $1 million a year budget, and 25% of that for HIP is for housing. We provide civil legal aid services and really critical reentry community-based services with a whole variety of partners. So with both Early Rep and HIP, they're not officially a diversion program because it's not necessarily, out of either the court or the DA's office that would make those decisions on filing, but we see them diversionary in nature because we're stabilizing individuals, we're advocating for them early on, we're connecting them with critical services and hoping to really shrink the footprint of the criminal system and move them out of the system by addressing some of the root causes of what is happening with this population.
Thank you. Just gonna ask if there are any additional questions or comments on this before we move forward to the next agenda item. Okay, so as I was saying a little bit earlier, what we wanted to do sort of with the second half of this meeting is follow up this conversation we had in the last meeting around COCO Lead Plus. We know that a lot of work went into that program and the development of eligibility criteria. And Ellen brought to our attention in a prior meeting, as we're thinking about eligibility criteria to be applied in terms of diversion countywide, that we could potentially use this, use the criteria that had been developed within COCO Lead Plus, recognizing that that was a specific program that has some specifics to it that may not be applicable, but that there should probably be plenty of language there that we can use and maybe edit or tweak a little bit, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Wanting to get a sense of how we might begin doing that, what the language is, and how we go about sort of incorporating that language into criteria that we can use for our purposes. So what I was hoping to do, obviously last time we got sort of a lot of background and a lot of context. And from that, I just sort of copied and pasted the criteria that we had into the document that you see here, in hopes that we could at least identify some of the places where we know that we're going to want to make some changes to language in order to be inclusive, some things that we know maybe don't apply that we need to rethink or rework, and get any initial thoughts on those after we've sort of gone through this document and done a little bit of that. What I can do is based on the information that we discuss here, right, bring something back to you that reflects sort of what you guys have highlighted, what questions or concerns you have about the languages here, to give you a good working draft of what the diversion subcommittee's diversion criteria could look like. And the purpose of this, of course, would be as part of the work plan to develop eligibility criteria that are that ensure equitable sort of outcomes and equitable utilization of diversion. And so basically to include this as or to include these drafts ultimately as part of the overall list of recommendations coming out of this subcommittee, potentially to the our job at large, and then up from there. So I guess what that means is, that it's sort of time to have a bit of a working session. And I know these are never fun and they get clunky and people get silent, but I think it's worth taking a look at some of this. And I would just highlight maybe a few areas that we could potentially look at. So number one, because it's sort of toward the top, you see the 1.11 there, right? The individual must be at least 18 years old at date of referring incident. Well, if we're talking about youth referrals, right, that's not a requirement that we would have. In fact, we may not need to have, you know, much in the way of language here because we'd be talking about something that refers to youth. So I would point that out to you guys. I think in addition to these, so the way that this is broken out is basically stuff that would apply to a bunch of different diversion programs. And then there are criteria that were specific. So there's some criteria in there about something, underlying action being related to sort of a diagnosis of some kind, right? Like mental health or something like that, or substance abuse, right? That's another space where you probably don't need, you know, that same criteria for something as broad as this. So just pointing that out as examples of sort of what I'm getting at. And I can actually share this in Word if that's okay with the group, so that folks can really look at it and we can at least do some highlighting of the portions where we need to pay close attention to what goes next. And Patrice, I see you.
Yeah, I also just want to remind everybody that this was based on the LEAD model, which is a law enforcement assisted diversion. So this is criteria with the understanding that where diversion is happening, and it's happening at the point of arrest. So I think before we get into the nitty gritty of the criteria, it might be worth it for the committee to decide at which decision points would you like to focus in on to then build your criteria around that. So DA Becton mentioned that she was hoping to do something around TAE at pre-filing. LEAD is at the ground level with police officers at the point of arrest. And then there's various other points in between. So, and actually even after filing. So it might be helpful, I would think, to kind of talk about where would we want to zero in our focus. What decision point do we want to focus in on to then just to create criteria around that?
Thank you for that, Patrice. I think based on everything that we just heard, right, it sounds like there is at least a good bit of interest in, you know, those potentially some of those earlier, at least at this point, some of those earlier decision points in the continuum. But that's just me attempting to reflect, you know, back to this group, some of the discussion points that I've heard so far. So I'm not here to make the decision for you, just bringing to mind that there's been a robust conversation about potentially wanting to act or be able to intervene or divert as early as possible. And if that's the case, sort of thinking about what some of those decision points might be and potentially choosing to focus there.
Thanks, Patrice, for your suggestion. Does anyone, any of the members have any thoughts given the discussions? Or have any objections to starting at the beginning, pre-filing or arrest?
And so you were pointing out, Patrice, that lead would have been, as law enforcement assisted diversion following that model, would have been at the point of arrest or at some later point.
Right, so the diversion point would be based on for all intents and purposes, based on the discretion of the police officer who would be making that arrest. Yeah, they had a little bit more discretion to decide whether or not they would even submit the citation or what have you to the DA's office. And then obviously it was collaborative, so depending on any other outstanding cases with regards to that individual, certain things could be negotiated with the DA's office to either just divert the individual on the existing charge. And if they have other pending charges too, that were like misdemeanors or fell within this category, collect them together and dismiss all of those as well.
I would also just point out to the group, and please, by all means, anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, as we have discussed diversion programs, like existing diversion programs, I don't know that we've seen diversion at the point of arrest. It seems like a lot of them, like we've had a lot of presentations, say, coming from the DA's office, whether that's, coming with a filing decision or something like that. So it seems like not only, we've obviously identified transition age youth as a potential gap, but in terms of gaps in the continuum, as far as having options, right, it seems that there may be, a gap in terms of having a diversion, like what you just described, Patrice, at the point of arrest. Somebody feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, but it seems like a lot of the diversion programs that we've received presentations on, maybe we're not at this decision point, but we're a little bit further down the line.
RPD does it at the point of, they have a program that they're doing at the point of arrest.
Okay.
I'm not sure of any other agencies that are doing that though.
I think it's a great idea to for that shift to the point of arrest that started earlier in the process. It almost gets back to that community policing that, some of the other states and counties outside of California have had a lot of success with more community-based policing. I guess my only concern in this county in particular would be, I guess, the discretion, the officer's discretion. And is it the individual officer's discretion? Is it the department's discretion? Is it like whose discretion is involved? Because I can say, just from experience in dealing with certain law enforcement officers, they're not all created equal. Some are really, really good at their job and some are not so good at their job. And I would be really concerned with just discretion. How is that determined? That just concerns me. That scares me a little bit. So that's my big issue with this. But I applaud the efforts to make this shift. And again, I've had personal experiences in my youth with great officers that talked to me and lectured me and said, "Hey, get away from here, don't do that." And then I've had some not so good experiences also. So the officer's discretion is going to be a big thing for this type of program.
So I'll add that in the context of COCO Lead Plus, the discretion was given based on the criteria that was established. And so then there was a separate diversion officer who did not have any direct contact with the individual, but is just looking at the arrest report. And so based on the report, assessing the report against the criteria and then determining that this individual based on that charge will be diverted. If there was any sort of gray area, again, based on the criteria that was established, that officer would then bring that case to the review panel. There's a secondary review panel that included law enforcement, public defender's office, DA, Antioch PD, I believe behavioral health was a part of it, and then one of the community-based organizations to then determine whether or not that person could be eligible for diversion. So there was a built-in mechanism to assist in that discretion, so to speak, or a guideline or policy. And actually that came from Antioch PD, to be honest, and that was kind of surprising. They wanted a policy to then follow, to know how to utilize that discretion in that moment. And so, so it didn't come directly from law enforcement, though other lead models do have that. They have where it's the actual police officer on the street making the direct diversion or referral, so to speak, to an actual community-based organization. We just didn't get that sophisticated where a CBO rep or what have you can meet with the officer on, you know, in the field on site to then help that person. So there's different ways and mechanisms to kind of get at what you're speaking to, Michael, that you can build in, so that there's some checks and balances around how discretion is utilized.
Okay. So it sounds like, at least from a decision point standpoint, you know, this still would be the relevant sort of model to potentially use, because this would be happening at the point of arrest. And Michael, I don't know if you were, I think you would have been in the meeting that we had specifically where we focused kind of on the background and context of this, but there was at least some feedback, I think from both Patrice and Ellen, right, in terms of how that process worked, because I definitely think your instinct is the right one, right, where discretion is used, right, that there's the potential for a lot of bias in situations like that. So usually we want to try to get away from that into sort of some policy driven, sort of automatic, systematic things happen the same way, regardless of who it is. And certainly, you know, if there's a way to try to build some of that into this, you know, I'd be open to it. But also, I just wanted to point out that or actually invite Ellen, you know, sort of, I think, to speak to, you know, how this was utilized and her impression of folks being able to get the opportunity with this particular model in terms of referrals.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it is a challenge. It's a really major systems change endeavor and I think the goal of a LEAD program is to basically give law enforcement officers on the front lines at that point of potential arrest another tool in their toolbox, right? So that they can say, I'm going to bring in a social work team in this moment. I'm going to bring in case managers. I'm going to bring in folks that can offer a different type of service rather than an arrest. And so, you know, I think many of us from Contra Costa also spent some time at a training up in Seattle, which is where, you know, LEAD originates from and has a long history, I think a decade or more. And the way that they described it in the training is that it's really a culture change for law enforcement. And so I would say in Contra Costa, I think we had some successful starts to our program. And I think we had some really bright spots, and the service provision and the partnerships were pretty pretty amazing. And I think some clients of ours really benefited from having those additional resources and having the system really approach them in a way that was novel, that was based on, harm reduction and really looking at their needs rather than the sort of arrest cycle that many of them had been used to. And a lot of the clients, they kind of had to be sort of frequent flyers to qualify for LEAD. So these weren't folks that had never been engaged in the system at all. It's people that had already been, arrested on previous occasions. So I think that was a good model to really ensure we're focusing on a population that needs it. But I would say here, I'm not sure we got the program running for long enough. I don't know if Patrice would agree to see if the kind of culture change that we needed to see that take root. So it's I think when you're doing it through law enforcement with this specific kind of diversion, it's really, there needs to be a lot of training and buy-in and kind of experience that takes time, right? So you have maybe an officer that's, engaged in LEAD out on the street, that's been trained and understands that's a tool at their disposal. And the way we implemented it here, it was a little removed from the line officers. So I think by virtue of the grant that we got and kind of the way that the whole program ended up being structured and the kind of collaboration we had, it was that an officer who wasn't necessarily the arresting officer later, a week or so later, days later, even reviewed the information and then circled back with the individual. So I think that it really depends on the implementation. I would say the team that we had involved from Antioch PD, the officer involved was, really engaged and interested in ensuring that we had services provided, but I don't think that we were at it long enough to really ensure that philosophy was, infused throughout the rest of the force, which I think is something that just naturally is going to take some time. But I know it's been really successful in a lot of other jurisdictions, and I think it could be successful here as well.
Quick question on this before potentially jumping back into some of this language. Did you have an impression of whether or not, this sort of referral process was easier than, say, the paperwork that goes into a report if an officer is making an arrest?
I think Patrice might have a better sense of that. So I'm going to punt that one to her because she was up on the front lines.
Yeah, I would say the way that this one rolled out, it was definitely administratively onerous. And it's own, and I would say, well, let me back up. I think the diversion at arrest, whatever paperwork that's required to at least confirm eligibility is going to be tricky no matter how you do this thing. Okay, so let me start from that premise. That said, how this was rolled out, it was definitely administratively onerous. I think primarily because of the way in which the review process was happening for confirming eligibility. So there was there's an extremely long lag time. And then you're reviewing or confirming eligibility on arrest reports of the prior week. So you already have a week that goes by where this individual is not being connected to any services or resources. And then once eligibility is determined, then the service provider staff has to go then and find that person, right? So you're kind of doing a cold sort of interaction or engagement versus a police at the point of arrest, where a police officer who may very well know this person because this person has been arrested multiple times by the same agency, you know, could theoretically connect with a CBO staff person much more quickly, or could take the individual to a site where services are provided. So that way, engagement or connection to this resource or the help that they need is a little bit more immediate. And then the paperwork be dealt with a little bit later. So, you know, I think, at least from that one particular officer's, not being him, I just can only assume that from his perspective, it was a lot of work that went into just confirming or determining eligibility, which then presents an issue with number of referrals getting into the program, number of referrals getting to service providers, how that initial connection is going to be made, how to sustain engagement from that point on. The other thing I want to mention is that even though this was applied at arrest, there was also an intention to have what we call social contact referrals. So these would be individuals that had been sort of identified, again, had been repeatedly arrested by this police department that officers knew about, that could just without arresting them, just saw them around the way, say, hey, you know, you might want to get connected to, you know, so-and-so service provider, you might be eligible for resources. And the one way that would have worked is that Antioch PD has what they called, I believe it was a community engagement team, their SET team. Yeah, so it was a couple of officers who were charged by the city to engage with the homeless population. So they were likely already connect or have had some engagement with the type of clients that would have been referred into this program if at the point of arrest, but it's like touch them before you have to arrest them, you know, if they have, yeah, touch them again before arrest is what I'm trying to say. So those social contact referrals then could go into folks just engaging in services without entering into the system to begin with. But that's based on the police officer's knowledge of those individuals. So again, there's various ways, but to your direct question, the way in which this particular criteria was applied, it was definitely very onerous on that one officer.
I appreciate that. I think I was asking that question because, you know, when we talk about buy-in and training among, you know, aspects of changing culture for agencies that might, you know, get involved with this sort of program, I find in other jurisdictions that I've worked in that it can be a lot easier to gain that buy-in if it is easier on the officer. If you're talking about more paperwork, say for the officer who might be making the stop to you know, to divert or to connect you to resources, then I would have to make the, you know what I mean? Then you know, you're gonna have a much harder time sort of selling, you know, or pitching that program or the benefits of it, particularly because you know, if folks feel like, hey, you know, I need to be available, I need to, you know, follow up on other cases, I can't, you know, spend, you know, all of this time in this one, you know, that's something that does come up, you know, for better or for worse. I certainly would understand people who, you know, would have an issue with efficiency sort of being the problem when you could, you know, be talking about the difference between entering the system and not. But it is a consideration, and so something that you know, usually helps, right? If there's a way to streamline the process in any way. But it sounds like here, perhaps the process might be kind of bad on the person who's designated to be doing this sort of review, and maybe not quite as bad on, you know, the officer who would be making the decision in the moment. I don't want to just, you know, have no sympathy for that person, whoever they may be. they may watch this video at some point and be like, this dude didn't care at all. But you know, that sounds like a little bit more of a workable situation, that particular scenario, than having every officer feel like, in order for me to even engage with this, is going to take way more out of me per stop. And on the topic of the sort of the way that decisions are made in terms of eligibility and the discretion there, just wanted to throw it to Joanna to speak about any examples she's seen in other jurisdictions. I know she's worked in a couple of other jurisdictions in the state of California as well as elsewhere. So.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. So the Burns Institute just recently finished helping Ventura County develop a pre-arrest diversion program for one of their law enforcement agencies. And a lot of the same issues that have been brought up are things that they had to work through. And so they really look towards, in terms of eligibility criteria and then the process, they really look towards Sentinella Youth Services, which I had dropped in the chat, which has a 3-tier system for pre-arrest diversion. So there was a lot of conversation on tier 1 being a lot of like training with officers on warning and releasing more kids. So recognizing that a lot of kids were getting cited for little things that they could have just been not touched by law enforcement at all. And then tier 2 was doing a warm handoff to a CBO, where there's no citation written, it's not mandatory. And then tier 3 would be the citation would be written, but it would be held as long as the young person went to this diversion program. And so then the way they teased out the eligibility criteria was by looking at a full year's worth of citation data and kind of listing out the top 3 reasons for which young people were getting cited. And then basically placing in each of the tiers, where would those different types of offenses that they're seeing a lot fit into the different tiers. And so we can definitely share that with you all if it's helpful. And then in terms of the actual process, I think it does land a lot on the individual officers to fill out certain paperwork that they develop for that diversion to happen. And then there is someone who kind of leads the program, who then reviews citations and sees if there's others that are eligible for diversion. And then the organization that runs it, so they ended up getting funding through the Youth Reinvestment Fund, which I think came out maybe a couple of years ago. And so it's a community-based organization, and their criteria is basically send us whoever. We don't have any criteria in terms of types of offenses. And so it really was working it out with the law enforcement and the DA's office on who they would send. And we did a lot of pushing around, let's not have it just be young people who's a first-time offense. Let's include young people who are already on probation, really trying to expand it to a wide array of young people. And we're able to do that for some and not for others. There's a lot of a negotiation process, but anyway, that's a long story to say. Any of that might be helpful as you all are thinking this through, we'd be happy to share and make connections if that's helpful, both to some of the people in Ventura County and Los Angeles as well. Did we lose Chris?
I think we may have.
Oh,
Oh, there he is.
he's back.
Did we?
It's not my day. I missed everything that whatever conclusion Joanna reached, which I'm sure was brilliant. Like I missed most of that. You were in the middle of talking when I cut out, so I'm not sure what all has been discussed at this point.
They had just gotten finished.
So really quickly, I would just highlight just a few of these things for you guys before we can. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done, but I just wanted to get some initial feedback on some of this before I start creating a draft for you guys to respond to, which is what we you know, kind of always do. That's typically the way that we do these sorts of things, and that's fine. But I definitely wanted to hear from folks on some of this. So, also in addition to you know, to folks on the subcommittee, obviously, you know, Patrice, with your experience with this, like any insight that you have based on what some of the background may have been. So I think when I'm looking at 1, 2, 3 here, in the case of social contact referrals have been arrested on an eligible offense at least twice in the past 12 months, that sounds to me like a clause that is meant to provide that, you know, that program or service on some level for folks who might need it, but also not to net widen, right? So it sounds like it's saying that if, you know, even if we're aware of someone who might need these services and want to get them these services before there's an actual arrest, there still needs to be some level of recent systems involvement. Otherwise, they may be turning things around on their own and not need, you know, the diversion program.
Sort of. So yeah, the intent for this one was to divert folks who were repeatedly arrested by Antioch Police Department. So, and mind you, across the various eligible offenses.
Great. And then next, underneath that, you see following circumstances are irrelevant to eligibility, immigration or citizenship, medical insurance. Right, so just spelling out, I mean, obviously these are things that you would expect, but just sort of spelling out in no uncertain terms that we're not turning people away for these things or, you know, seeking, I mean, these are very important sort of disclosures or explicit statements to make so that folks who may fall into these categories can know, you know, that the program does still apply to them. Give me 1 second here, and then we're gonna ask that we change the page. I think I want to go to page 47 of the agenda, Nicole. So in particular, number 7 here, as we're talking about sort of this is beginning to get into sort of some of the offense types. And so I think my main curiosity here, especially with you know, some of the folks who are named in 7.1, but certainly with any insight that anyone has to offer, not limited to you know, say public defender or attorneys or you know, district attorney as well. But I'm curious if there are maybe offenses that were discussed but didn't end up on this list, or if there are glaring sort of omissions in terms of where this was eligible, given that this was for a specific program and we're sort of developing something that's countywide, if there are big glaring changes that need to be made in terms of this list. There are some drug crimes in 7.2, but I think there are all sorts of additional offenses. And Michael, I see your hand.
My question, I guess, is why is this just limited to people who have actually been arrested prior and not for first offenses or first arrest?
It was basically just based on the program design for the Prop 47 grant that was sought after. The idea was that we wanted to provide resources to your most vulnerable, most individuals that are, for the most part, rendered pretty invisible, but yet are repeatedly arrested and have some sort of underlying behavioral health challenge. So with all the sufficient funding meant that we want to provide really intensive supports and resources to help reduce the number of arrests among that type of population. So in considering, so given that, in considering your criteria, it's probably best to know what population you're aiming for, or what was the target that you're wanting to affect. I'm hearing a lot about first-time offender, or since first-time offenses, or individuals who first-time offenses to be considered for diversion. I'm hearing different age groups. So given that sort of setup, that is also going to play a role in what your criteria will be, or even the types of offenses you want to look at as potentially divertible.
And so Patrice, it seems like to me, like when you go up to the first eligibility criteria that you have listed, that could apply to people who, you know, it was their first offense. And it seems like the social contact referrals in particular are saying you had to have, you know, been arrested. I think it was at least twice within the last year or something like that. So is it, am I right in understanding that folks could be first time, it could be their first time entering the system and they would still be eligible for the program?
No, I think you had to have at least 1 or 2 prior arrests by this particular agency.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you for asking that question, Michael, because I misunderstood when I was seeing the part. It looked like the way it was written, it could have been construed, at least in my mind, as one. It's like if I had to have 1 prior, you know, does that mean this one that I'm coming in on? So I think that's definitely worth highlighting. I'm marking that down as a place that we might want to look at, you know, altering the language just to be inclusive. And I mean, obviously, everything that Patrice said, you know, makes sense. And when you guys see this on paper, you can kind of get a sense of, are we hitting the right population? We think, are we catching everyone that we need to catch, or not? I don't know if there were any additional thoughts on that before I ask again about the specific offenses that are listed in terms of being diversion eligible, and whether or not anyone sees that there's anything missing, or if and I may have asked this before to the folks who directly work on this project, if there were offenses that were discussed, but that were then left off the list for some reason that we may potentially include or consider include.
I think that if we were designing something for, you know, 2021, 2022 and the future, it would look different than this list of charges that we arrived at back when we were putting together the grant proposal to the BSCC for COCO Lead Plus. But I would say kind of having a detailed conversation around what those would be and how to expand those is a broader endeavor. So I'm happy to throw out penal code sections, and I'm sure Michael has a few that he could, you know, share as well. But I'm not sure if that's the most productive way to kind of discuss this and move forward. But I will say that COCO Lead Plus was really lower level and very limited, and of course a pilot project and program. So I think, you know, having maybe a separate meeting, I don't want to try to create or suggest additional meetings, but I do think maybe flagging that for some consideration if we're going to get involved in drafting a proposal of that level of detail would be a good idea, because it is, you know, there are so many different penal codes that do get frequently charged in our local courts. It's very complex. I know that all of the stakeholders involved are going to have different opinions. It was a robust discussion when we did Contra Costa Lead Plus. And again, some of that was governed by who was at the table in that moment. And, you know, the fact that, you know, we were dealing with a specific grant with specific parameters. So I think if our quest right now is to look at ways to reduce system impact on people of color in Contra Costa, and looking at the specific charges and who should be diverted age-wise and group-wise, and who should be diverted charge-wise, that the piece around which charges is certainly a big question and a big topic. And I'm happy to be involved and discuss that. And I have lots of opinions I'd love to share, but it's a big conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to
think-
echo, oh, if I can, I want to echo Ellen's point, because even in the creation of this criteria, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, there was a full scale, what was it titled? Law enforcement work group that include a lot of the legal eagles there. And there was a lot of negotiation that was taking place, a lot of robust discussion, a little bit of tension, I'm sure, in those conversations, just to identify and have strong rationales to why certain offenses would be eligible for diversion, and also then prompted having simultaneously an exclusionary criteria. So you kind of knew your bounds, if you will.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. I think that's all helpful. Certainly, we're not going to sort of run from whatever tension may arise. We know that's a part of this work, but I think you answered a better question than I asked, which is that you have some things in mind that you might be able to identify that maybe you would like to see included in this, and then we can talk about it at some other time. I think primarily that was my question, right? Are there some glaring things off the top of your head, if you had to look at this, that you might additionally consider? And it sounds like the answer is yes. Maybe let's workshop that particular part of the draft and come back with something that sort of outlines some of that and get some feedback and take it from there. Understanding that part of it will be probably the part that takes the longest, but in terms of doing sort of some countywide diversion eligibility criteria, it seems hard to get around it. I'm again very, very sorry for all the hammering that's going on in the background. Okay, so I think this to me seems like a decent place to end this discussion for now. I think there's been some really good points made. I mean, wait a minute, I shouldn't be saying that. I should ask if there are if there's any public comment on this, or if there are any additional questions that haven't been asked up to this point. I'm just trying not to keep hearing this thumping near my head, but I will stay for as long as stay in this particular space. I know Nicole has a poll that I think she wants to roll out about next month's meeting, and I think that's going to be really important. But we can stay here for as long as we need to if there are additional questions or concerns from anyone on the subcommittee and or public comment.
I think we're fine to move.
Okay. So the next steps for me are to sort of come back with some language around the transition age youth as a area of focus for diversion programs and such, to see what folks think of that, or what feedback you have once that language is drafted, as well as to take into consideration the discussion that we've had up to this point, and to potentially bring back some language there as well. And in the meantime, probably to schedule a meeting or to attempt to have one with Ellen and Michael. Not sure if we could do that before the next meeting, or if that needs to happen, sometime between now and, January 2nd or 3rd week of January, but we will figure that out, maybe to hash out some of the specific offense types that we would want to try to include, or at least highlight as potentials for inclusion. And in addition to that, there's a next step, as I mentioned before, on Nicole's end. So the next subcommittee meeting would be December 16th. And I think Nicole has a poll, just wanted to make sure that there would be sufficient attendance for that meeting. We know the holidays are closing in, so on and so forth. So
just members could answer this question. Just wanted to see who can come. Okay. Okay, I just needed five yeses. So that's good. It looks like we have quorum. So that's good.
All right, well, Stephanie,
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And
Since it was already, this is Tamisha. I want to be clear that like, since it was already on my calendar, I feel like, I was pressured to say yes.
Yes, Commissioner. Yes, Tamisha, because you always bow to the pressure.
Well, I look forward to seeing everybody on the 16th. I know some folks will be off next week, so please enjoy your time with your families, if you're spending time with your families or time off. And our meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.